All right, Trouble, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, Shandi and Avram Kelman, for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drushos this month in honor of Yechiel's engagement to Alana Falik and in memory of their parents, Jerome and Bernice Kelman, and Alexander and Federica David Zichronim Livracha. To thank Barak, Maya, and Sandy Hoffman, Dora Limas, and Avi Malamed for dedicating all the Shiurim this month in memory of Ruvain ben Emmanuel Zichron Livracha. To thank Ayala and Sarah Steinberg for dedicating all the Shiurim this month in the Schus of Refuah Shalema for Shulamis Bas Susha. We thank Daf Yomi Shir for dedicating the Shiurim this month in the Schus of Refuah Shalema for Yehuda ben Michal. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamos Lav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, and all of those who need a refuah will have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. So we'll say with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem, but the truth is incredible Gemara, and we're gonna do it. All right, so today's Daf is Samech Ches 68. We left off yesterday on 67b Samech Ches Amud Beis. We left off, Rabosai, if you notice again, there are the short lines, the intermediate lines, and the widest lines. We left off 2 lines into the widest lines. Tan Rabbanan. Rabosai, a very interesting sugya. Ein lo ve'eino rotze lehisparnes. Let's say the following situation. Person will call him Ruvain. Ruvain doesn't have money. That's what it means. Ein lo. He doesn't have money. But eino rotze lehisparnes, which means he does not want to accept charity. Doesn't want to accept tzedakah. So what do? Nostim lo l'shum halva. We go ahead, see he's not willing to accept charity, so what we do is we give him a loan. We tell him it's a loan. The chozim and nostim l'shum matana, de Rebbe Meir. And then once he accepted the money, essentially then we say, okay, it's not a loan anymore, keep it. So we convince him to take it as a loan. De Rebbe Meir. The Chacham say no. Nostim lo l'shum matana. You give it to him as a gift. The chozim and nostim l'shum halva. And then, once he's accepted it, you transform it into a loan. The Gemara says, what does that mean? Remember, we're talking about a guy who's resistant to accept tzedakah. So if you offer him a gift, he's not going to accept it. Amarava, what it means is, what it means is, begin by offering it as a gift. If he doesn't want to accept it as a gift, he will say, by the way, here's the difference. In other words, there's 3 different things that's happening over here. There's tzedakah, matana, halva'a. So this is a guy who doesn't have money. He does not want to accept tzedakah. So the first approach of Rabbi Meir is, okay, so offer him a loan, because at least the loan allows him to keep his dignity, right? Remember, we'll say, when you lend someone money, by definition, what does that show? That you have confidence in them. To what? To pay back. In other words, you don't go ahead and lend someone money if you don't feel confident that they're capable. So by definition, offer him a loan. Once he accepts it as a loan, then go ahead and say, okay, you know what, it's a gift. The second approach, Chacham say, no, offer it as a gift. Because a gift is a gift, right? A gift is just a nice, beautiful gesture. If he doesn't accept it as a gift, then go ahead and offer it to him as a loan. Incredible. So Amarava, liftach lo l'shumatana. I'm sorry. Right. It's all good. Next case. Yeshlo ve'in rotze lehisparnes. So it's an interesting case. So if a person has money, ve'in rotze lehisparnes. So we'll say this is an interesting case. He has money, but he does not want to spend his own money on supporting himself. So instead, he wants to rely on communal tzedakah. It's actually interesting. If you look at Rashi says, Yeshlo ve'in rotze lehisparnes, mishalo el mishal tzedakah, o musagev atzmo barav. So this is a fascinating case. And Rabbi say, you'd actually be surprised situations like this happen. Reuven has money. He has money. He does not want to spend his own money. So instead, what is he doing? He's withering away in front of our eyes. In other words, he's just not taking care of himself. He's so desperate not to spend his own money. So the question is, what do we do with him in terms of communal funds? So the Gemara says, no, we give the money to him as a gift. And then we go ahead and go back and extract payments from him. So the Gemara says, but if you go ahead and you extract payments from him, sulo shakil, he's not going to accept the money. To which the Gemara says, no, la achar misa. Rav Papa says we give him the money, let him take care of himself, and then after he dies, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and collect it from his estate. So Reb Shimon says, so good, fine. Yeshlo, this party. So Reb Shimon disagrees. Reb Shimon says, if a guy has money, but he does not want to use his own money in taking care of himself, ein niskakin lo. We don't get involved in such a situation like this. In other words, they both say, what's happening over here is a fundamental machlokes in general about what do you do with a person who's not willing to take care of themselves. So do we intervene in such a situation like this? So first opinion says yes. Just because a person is not willing to take care of themselves doesn't mean the community could wash their hands of him. And Rabbi Shimon says, look, the community can't help you any more than you want to help yourself. Which I will say is such a profound yisod, right? All of us know people who need help. And we also know people who know they need help, but are not willing to do the work they need to do in order to help themselves. And it's a heartbreaking situation, because they want to help. Rabbi say, but Rabbi Shimon's words are so true. No one could help you more than you are willing to help yourself. So Rabbi Shimon says, you have money, you don't want to spend it. The community can't help you more than essentially what it comes down to is like this. No one could be more invested in your success than you are in your own success, right? Or better stated, you have to be at least as invested in your own success as anyone else's. And if you're not, the world can't help you. Pretty incredible. So the Gemara goes right there. Yeshlo. So the Gemara says, what happens if a person doesn't have money, but he also doesn't want to accept tzedakah? So omrim lo have a mashkon v'tol. We say, okay, you know what? Give collateral and ultimately take the money. Kadesh tazuach taitolav, which Rabbi says another way of saying what we said before. Give him a loan. Good. So I'll just point out here. The Gemara says, ha'aveit zeh she'ein lo ve'ein rotz l'ispanis. So remember again in yesterday's daf, we already pointed this out. The pasuk that details the halach of tzedakah is incredibly repetitive. Remember again, the pasuk we're referring to is ki pasach tiftach es yad chalo. Open up your hand to the ani. V'ha'avet ta'avitenu. Now remember again, how do we translate? Ha'avet ta'avitenu. Give him, right? Give him, or we translate, you shall surely give him. But really what it means is, give him. De machzero. Give him enough to make him whole from which he is deficient, asher yechsar lo, that he is lacking. So it's incredibly repetitive. So watch this. The Gemara says, Ha'aveit zeh she'ein lo ve'ein rotze l'isparnis. Ha'aveit, give. This refers to a person who doesn't have money but doesn't want to accept tzedakah. So what do we do with such a person? She'nos lo shum halva. We convince him to accept the money as a loan. V'chozrin v'nos lo shum matana. Then we go ahead and we transform it into a gift. Ta'avitenu. Give him. This refers to a person who has money but doesn't want to use his own money to support himself. We give it to him as a gift. And we'll extract repayment for this gift after his death from his estate. That's Rabbi Yehuda. The Chum say no. If somebody has money and he does not want to take care of himself, we don't get involved with such an individual. Again, we can't be more invested in your own success than you are. So what do you do with the second ta'avitenu? Torah just speaks in the natural expression. Torah speaks in a certain words. It was common, or as we see this often, that biblical speak is repetition, right? Sometimes people say something twice in order to reinforce it. Okay, good. Well, I'll say incredible Gemara. So here's what we do know. What we do know about is the Gemara is introducing us to the concept that sometimes, in order to go ahead and get a person to accept money that they need, you're allowed to change the truth a little bit. In other words, I want to give Ruvain tzedakah. Ruvain's not going to go and accept tzedakah. So what am I allowed to do? Tell him what? It's a loan. I can even accept collateral from him, knowing full well that what's my intention. As soon as that money reaches his hands, what am I going to do? I'm gifting it to him. Right? Concept number 2 is if a person has but doesn't want to take care of himself, How much are we obligated to go ahead and help such an individual? Machlokes. One opinion says, okay, give it to him as a gift and just extract it from the estate after his death. Second opinion, don't do it. It's not going to work. Can't be more invested in someone else's success than the individual is himself. I will point out, by the way, that the Rambam highlights in Hilchos Tzedakah, that the highest form of helping someone is giving them a job. Right? In other words, the highest form of tzedakah is not a handout in any way. The highest form of tzedakah is help a person become self-sufficient. Rabbi says, goes back to yesterday's daf, where we saw the concept that part of the idea of tzedakah is a restoration of a sense of self. Right? When a person doesn't have what they need to take care of themselves, it erodes their sense of self. The mitzvah of tzedakah is help restore. So the Rambam says, okay, what better way to restore a sense of self than giving a job? Right? Only after, if you can't give a job, then these other levels kick in. Halva, a loan, because a loan also helps restore a sense of self. You believe in a person that they have the ability to repay, and so on and so on. The Gemara tells a story, incredible story. Mar Ukva, Hava Anya B'Shivusa, Davaragel Kol Yom D'Shadi Le Arba Zuzei B'Tzinor D'Dasha. Beautiful story. Mar Ukva had an ani in his neighborhood, and every day he used to give this ani 4 zuz. And it was interesting. He would deposit it, Rabbi say, literally, Sinura Didasha means the pivot of the doorway. So there was like a little crevice in the doorway. He would drop money. Anonymously in the pivot of the doorway. Yom Echad Amar Ezel Ihi Man Ka'avid. Biahua Tivusa. So one day the ani said, listen, I want to see who my anonymous benefactor is over here, right? I want to see who is leaving me this money every day. Listen to this. Hahu Yoma, Naga Lemar Ukva Lebe Midrasha. So we'll say that day, Mar Ukva. So now here's this, right? So the ani now he's gonna hide and wait to see who is depositing the money. So what happened to say? So that day, Mar Ukva got the lead in the base medrash. Asya Devisu Bahadei. So we'll say, so his wife came to pick him up from the basement, which is quite beautiful. Wife comes to pick him up, and they together go to drop off the money at the house of this ani. Kevan de chazua de kamasli leiladasha nafik basrayu. So Mar Ukva drops the money in the door pivot, right in the doorway, and the ani comes running after. Right, the ani sees somebody just dropped money. The ani comes running out. Mar Ukva and his wife run. They run. They do not want to be discovered by the ani. Rahut mikame. They run away from the ani. Aidi lahu atuna dahavegrufa nura. So it's like, listen to this story. They were so desperate to conceal their identity from the ani. Because I will say, again, they wanted their act of tzedakah to be anonymous. Giving tzedakah anonymously, I will say, is one of the highest forms of tzedakah. I will point out, there is an exception to this rule of anonymous tzedakah if people know that you gave, they'll be inspired to give. This way, we'll say in many situations, building funds, for example, right? Always encourage people to not to be anonymous, because if people see, Reuven's giving, I can give also. So if you have the ability through publicizing your involvement to encourage others to give and to be the catalyst for other people's tzedakah, then that's an incredible schos. But again, this type of one-on-one giving, Mar Ukva felt anonymity was the key. So what do they do? Where do they hide? They ran into an oven. Now, this must have been one very big oven, right? They ran into an oven that had the coals raked out of it. But it was still hot. So they were so desperate to conceal their identity that they ran into this oven. But so listen to this. Havaka Mekailin Kar'i Mar Ukva. Mar Ukva's feet were getting burned by the floor of the oven. Obviously, it was very hot in there. Amar le'divisu. So his wife said to him, Shakol kar'ech osiv akaroi. Stand on my feet. Her feet weren't getting burned. Stand on my feet. So I will say, Chalosh daite. So Mar Ukva was very distressed, because obviously my wife has some zuchos that I don't, that her feet aren't getting burned, and my feet are getting burned. So Amrale, she said, don't be upset. Ana shachichna begave de beisa, umekarva ahanaisi. So I will say, listen to this. So she said, don't worry, don't be upset. She said, I have a greater opportunity to perform tzedakah than you do. Number one, I'm home. I'm home, and therefore, again, when the aniyim come to the house, I am always there to help you. You're ma'akva, you're out. And number two, I give them immediate benefit. How so? She said, when the aniyim come to the house, I give them food. You mar ukva, you give them money. So therefore, again, money is great, but Lamaisa, they still have to go out and use the money to go out and purchase the food. So she said, because of this, I have certain zechuyos that you don't have, and that's why her feet were not getting singed by the floor of the oven. I will say it's such a beautiful, beautiful Gemara. I will say it's also, if you think about it, by the way, a beautiful metaphor in marriage. That in a good marriage, sometimes one spouse is able to stand on the feet of the other. No, in a marriage, rarely do you have a situation where both spouses are strong. Usually in any situation, one is strong and one is stronger, right? Or one is strong and one is weak, right? This is like the back and forth, the ratzov v'shov of marriage. And in a beautiful, loving marriage, the stronger spouse says to the struggling spouse, stand on my feet. Now I'll say, sometimes like when your children are young and you dance with your children, so they put their feet on top of your feet and you move around. And I will say that's such a beautiful moment in a parent-child relationship because literally, again, my child is standing on me and I'm supporting my child. In a marriage, sometimes you need the same thing also. Stand on my feet. Right now, you can't walk. Right now, you can't stand on your own. It's okay. When you can't stand on your own, you have me. And conversely, in those moments when I can't stand on my own, I'll have you. Such a beautiful Gemara. Umay kulehai, says the Gemara, why do we need to run into ovens? In order to go ahead and conceal identity. Right? In other words, what's going on over here? So the Gemara says, the Amarav Mezutra Bar Tovia Amarav, the Amrile Amrav Huna Bar Bizna Amrav Shem Chasida, V'Amrav Yochel Mishum Shem Yochai, Noach Lo Li Adam, Sheyimsar Atzmo L'Soch Kiv Shana Eish, Ve'al Yalbin Penei Chavero Berabim. Wow. I will say, why? Where does this come of giving tzedakah anonymously? Why is it so important? It's based on the concept, Rabosai, that it is better for a person to throw himself into a fiery furnace and not to embarrass his friend publicly. So I will say, this is a really interesting idea because here, remember again, we know this concept, right? We've seen it. The first time we saw this concept was in Maseches Brachos. I know this idea, but the truth is, Malvin B'nei Chavero is generally what? We assume it's actively embarrassing someone. Here, what the Gemara is introducing us to is the concept of embarrassing someone in the performance of a mitzvah, right? Mar Ukva is giving tzedakah, but you see that even in the performance of a mitzvah, one has to be vigilant that the act of the mitzvah in no way compromises the dignity of the other. Mar Ukva felt this guy would have been embarrassed. He would have been embarrassed. So therefore, literally better. Now I'll point out, the commentaries point out, Noach means it's nice. It's nice doesn't mean it's an obligation, right? It just means the idea that Chazal are trying to highlight over here is that halacha l'maisa, you have to be so careful about how you go ahead. Now, I will say, again, don't walk into furnaces and don't walk into ovens in other words, this is not for us. What's for us is to be sensitive about the feelings of another person. But Ma'uk was taking this now to a new level that even the performance of a mitzvah. Where do we know this from? Mitamar Dichsev, he mutseis. Let's remember again, this is not from Tamar, because Tamar is pregnant by Yehuda, right? But instead of embarrassing Yehuda publicly, what she does is the person who owns the staff, the person who owns the signet ring, this is the father of my child. And she leaves it to Yehuda. If you own it, good. And if not, I'm not going to embarrass you publicly. But I'll say an incredibly profound yisod about how careful we have to be with the feelings of the other. Next, Mar Ukva, Hava Anya B'Shivusei, Davaragia Lishtrale Arba Meazuzei Komali Omedikipura. Let's listen to this story. Mar Ukva used to have an anya. We'll say a lot of stories of Mar Ukva and Tzedakah. Mar Ukva was also very wealthy. Very wealthy. So you see again what he did with his wealth. Mar Ukva havi anya b'shivusei davarega l'shadurei arba me'azuzi kolamali yom dikipura. So Mar Ukva had a pauper in his neighborhood, and he used to send this guy 400 zuz every Erev Yom Kippur. So a lot of money every Erev Yom Kippur. Yoma Chad Shadrinu Nehila Biad Berei. So one year, Rav Mar Ukva sent the money with his son. Asa Amar Leilo Tzarich. Son comes back, says to his father, Dad, this guy does not need the money. Why? Amar my Chazis, what did you say? Chazai dekam zalfi le yayin yashan. I saw that he was spritzing old wine. In other words, we'll say people used to go ahead. I guess this was like Talmudic air freshener, right? So what did he use for air freshener? Aged wine. I will say, to start using aged wine as air freshener, you're doing pretty good, right? You're doing pretty good. So the son comes back and he says, Dad, this pauper that you're supporting with all of this money is using aged wine as air freshener. I don't think he needs your money. So Amar mefanki kulehai, I finhu fishadrinhu nihale. So we'll say, so listen to this. So Mar Ukva said, obviously, if this guy is going ahead and using aromatic wine, right, so obviously he needs even more money. Mar Ukva doubled the amount and sent it with his son. They're both saying the idea over here was, remember, this goes back to yesterday's daf, that part of the mitzvah of tzedakah is when someone was once very wealthy and now lost that wealth, part of the mitzvah of tzedakah is the restoration of self. So Mar Ukva felt this is what they were used to. This was the standard of living that they were used to. And ultimately, again, I feel now perhaps I should give them a little bit more money so that, again, help with that restoration of self. So they both say, again, as I mentioned in yesterday's daf, one should not necessarily glean from that Hilchos Tzedakah Halacha Lemaisa. Because Hilchos Tzedakah Halacha Lemaisa are a little bit more complicated, especially given the fact that often we are faced with many competing needs. In any event, the point over here is that Mar Ukva was sensitive that part of the mitzvah of tzedakah was that restoration of self. Listen to how the story ends. Mar Ukva's story ends. Ki neicha nafshe. When Mar Ukva was dying, Amar Aisulei Chushbana de tzedakah. Bring my tzedakah ledgers. Ashkach davik sivbe shivas alfe dinari si anki. Because it turned out that Mar Ukva had given 700 si'anki dinarim. Let's say over his lifetime, he had distributed an exorbitant amount of tzedakah. So let's say, listen to this beautiful statement. He said, Amar, zavdoi kalili va'archa rechikta. My load is light, or my provisions are light. Look at Rashi. Zavdoi kalili, tzeda kala hachinosi l'derech rechoka sha'ani yotze la. I will say, I haven't packed enough. Essentially, I have very light provisions for a very long journey. Mar Ukva said, as much tzedakah as I've given, I have not given enough. The tzedakah, I will say, again, the tzedakah that he was going to give, that tzedakah, those are his provisions for the journey, right? In the Olam HaEmes, no one cares how much money you made. In the Olam HaEmes, the only thing they care about is how much money did you give. So he said, I'm preparing my provisions for the Olam HaEmes, and my provisions are very light. So we'll say, what did he do? We'll say 5 lines up from the bottom. Samech Zayin B'day 67b. Kam bizbizei lepalgei mamone. He went ahead, and at that moment, I will say, from his deathbed, he gave away half of his wealth. Half of his wealth. The Gemara says, 1 second. Echi avid hachi. How did he do this? We learned the halacha. And Usha instituted, Rabbi said that what? You can't give away more than 1/5 of your wealth, more than 1/20 of your, more than 20% of your estate. Suppose to listen to this. Hani mili mechayim sherei menechasav aval la'achar misa les lanba. It will say the takana of Usha that you cannot give away more than 1/5 of your estate is when you're alive. Because what was the logic? The logic is we don't want you giving to the point of self-impoverishment. When a person is about to die, they could give away whatever they want. So that's what. So Mar Ukva on his deathbed, gave away even more tzedakah. But I will say that metaphor that Mar Ukva said is the journey is long and my provisions are light. Right? So I will say the journey to the Olam HaEmes. What are your provisions? Your provisions are your mitzvahs. So do I have enough provisions to sustain me for the journey ahead. What a profound Gemara. Let's go weiter. Rabbi Avo havos sayer zuzi besudre, v'shadile la'achore, umamtse nafshi lebe aniye. So we'll say, Rabbi Abba did something very interesting. He used to have money, like in a little pack or like in a little bag, and he would sling it over the back of his shoulder. The aniyim would know that that's where he kept the money, and they would come and take tzedakah as needed. He did it like this, why? So that he would not know the identity. They knew that he was there. They could come and they could take the money if they needed it, but he didn't have to know their identity. However, umatzli eine meramoy, but he would go ahead and cast a glance here and there to be able to detect if anyone who didn't really need the money was coming to try to take it. So the Gemara is introducing us to the concept that unfortunately there are unscrupulous individuals who come to go ahead and try to exploit the generosity of Klal Yisrael. So on one hand, he would maintain anonymity by not going in and looking at who was taking, but he would cast a furtive glance here and there to scare off any Ramon. Incredible. Rabbi Chanina havahu anya davei ragil shadurle arba zuzi kol male shabsa. Rabbi Chanina had an ani who used to send 4 zuzim every Erev Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Yom achad shadrina heli biyad. One day he sent the money with his wife. Asay Amrla, she came back and she said to him, Lo tzarech, that guy who you send money to every Erev Shabbos, he doesn't need the money. She says, why? She says to his wife, what did you see? My chazis, Shami dahavika amrile b'ma'ata soed. She said, I walked into the house and I heard the servants saying to this guy, what type of tablecloth would you like to use tonight? Top of Samechas, Betalei kesef or betalei zav. Literally, again, you want the silver cloths or the gold cloths. So we'll say, Rashi points out to where it's not literally silver or gold, but rather, again, it's a question of linen or excuse me. Thank you. Wool or linen. The point of Rabbi is she saw a dramatic display of wealth in this guy's house. So she said, I think he's playing you a little bit. You think he needs money. I don't think he needs money. So let's listen to this. Amar. So Rabbi Chanina said, Amar, top of Samachas 68a, first line. Amar, Hanun Dam Rabbi Elazar, Bo v'nachzik tov l'Ramayin. We have to give an incredible thanks to Ramayin. I will say, who are Ramayin? People who don't need to, right? How do you translate a Ramay? A fraudulent individual, right? We have to give thanks to the fraudulent individual. So the people who take tzedakah even though they don't need it. Why? Shil malehein hayinu chotim b'chol yom. See, I will say, why is it good that there are fraudulent tzedakah collectors? Because if there weren't fraudulent ones, then we would be in trouble because sometimes we say no. Meaning what? Listen to this. Shnei Amar, v'kara alecha al Hashem v'haya b'cha chet. They will say the pasuk over here is talking about if someone needs tzedakah and you don't give them tzedakah, they will call out against you to Hashem v'haya b'cha chet, and you will be considered a sinner. V'tanei b'chiyah barav midifti Rabbi Shimon karcha omer. Wow. I will say, if I shield my eyes and give me tzedakah, in other words, if there is a tzedakah need and I don't rise to the occasion, it is as if I've worshipped idolatry. It's incredible. Both it says over here, be careful, lest there be something bili'al with your heart. Uksiv hasam yatsu anashe b'nei bili'al. I will say the word bili'al is a contraction of bili'ol, without the yoke of heaven. So we'll say the Torah uses the same notion of bili'al by avodah zarah and by one who does not give tzedakah. So I will say, so it's actually pretty incredible. So the Gemara says over here, failure to give tzedakah to someone in need is as egregious and as serious as worshiping idolatry. Were it not for the fact that there are frauds, there are people who are fraudulent, so that gives me pause before I give. So let's say again, Ruvain comes to me and asks for tzedakah, I don't give. So we'll say again, not giving tzedakah is a terrible aveira. What's the saving grace? The saving grace is I could claim that I thought Ruvain was a fraud. He's a fraud. Right? And therefore, again, so we'll say, isn't it interesting how you have to have akar satov to everyone, right? Even the people who are fraudulent, right? Because even the fraudulent tzedakah collectors, they save us. Because if everyone was genuine, and I didn't give every single time, I'd really be in a lot of trouble. Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. There are some unscrupulous individuals who collect tzedakah inappropriately. They save me from chait. You know what you see from here? Everyone in this world has a purpose, right? And everyone has a tachlis. Even the ovrei avera, right? Even the unscrupulous or fraudulent individuals, they do an incredible service to Klal Yisrael as well. So incredible. Tan Rabbanon, Hamasamius Eino. So we'll say a person who blinds his eye. These are examples of people who try to portray themselves as having a need, but they don't really have a need. So someone who pretends he's blind, or Hamat says bitno, or someone who pretends that his stomach is bloated because of hunger. Hamikafeach as shoko, or someone who goes ahead and pretends like his leg is withered, that he can't speak. That he can't walk. So again, all of these are examples of people who pretend like they have some type of disability in order to go ahead and collect tzedakah. So again, if you pretend that you have an infirmity in order to collect tzedakah, ultimately you will not leave this world until you actually suffer from this infirmity. So the Gemara says, so if a person receives tzedakah and doesn't require it, ultimately, again, he will not leave this world until he suffers from poverty. So we'll say, this Gemara is also something very interesting. So I understand, it seems to what the Gemara is saying is, if you defraud tzedakah, right, and accept it when you don't need it, so the punishment is you'll come to need it. Also, I think it's also something deeper. A person who relies on tzedakah, right, what are they not doing? They're not striving for self-sufficiency. Well, I will say, you know what happens? After enough time of simply relying on others, that becomes your default. You lose your drive. You lose your quest for self-sufficiency. So it doesn't even have to be a punishment. It could just be what? Just a cause and effect. When you lose your drive for personalistic excellence, when you lose your drive for sustaining yourself, when you lose your drive for self-sufficiency, and you just rely on others, over time, you just lose it altogether, and you really have to rely on tzedakah. Tanan awesome. Ein mechayvin also limkars beiso v'es klei tashmish. It's an interesting case. So let's say someone is in need. They show up to the communal tzedakah fund, but they have possessions. So the Gemara says we don't force a person to sell off their possessions before they collect money for tzedakah. So the Gemara says, Well, is that true? Vatanya. But yet we learn that what if a person was using golden utensils, we tell him downgrade, right? Sell off the gold utensils, buy silver utensils, and use the money to help your situation. So the Gemara says, or if you're using silver utensils, downgrade to copper. Shabbos say that's talking about, when do we say that you have to sell off? That's talking about your bed and your table. When do we say you don't have to sell off? That's with cups and plates. Cups and plates we don't make you sell. Maishna kosos v'karos delo do'amar mi'isili. Let's say a person is very particular about what they eat off of and drink from. So with your utensils, we don't make you sell that in order to provide necessary funds. A mita and a shulchan will make you sell that. You must really mita of a shulchan ami arlo mikabli loy. Let's say that's not true. A person's bed, people are pretty particular about. A shulchan people are pretty particular about. Amrav Breid Rava b'macharish dekas. But you're right. What are we talking about over here? Let's say Rabbi has a silver plow. So let's say if you have a plow made of silver. Okay, the truth is, what's the goal of a plow? To plow. No one needs a plow of silver. And I said, go ahead, sell that off, buy yourself a regular iron plow, and now use the proceeds of that to go ahead and help support yourself. But perhaps your other utensils, what we'll call of daily living, we don't make you sell that off. Papa Lokasha, kan kodim shebali de gibui, kam la'achar shebali de gibui. So we'll say Papa has an alternate resolution. Papa's resolution, he explains like this. That Allah, if you look at Rashi, kan kodem sheyabali de gibui, Rashi says, hadisnan in mechayvin meikara kai kishabalita leket. lo hayu masayim zuz im haya mocher klei tashmisho haya masig lemasayim zuz im mechayvin also limkar. V'had disnan mechayvin la'achar sheba lidei gibui la'achar shevi atzmo lidei kach shebezin goven emenu ki go shela masayim zuz. Both says, listen to it, it's outside. So first of all, I neglected to read one Rashi. We'll say the halacha is as follows: in order to be able to collect leket shichachan peah, the only way you're permitted to do that is if you have less than 200 zuz to your name. Here's the interesting question. Let's say your bank account says 150 zuz, but you have possessions. And if you were to sell off those possessions, you'd have more than 200 zuz. So the Gemara says, we don't make you sell off your possessions. We look at your cash position. The exception is, Macharisha Shal Kesef, if you have some very grand items, like a silver plow, that we're going to tell you, sell that off. Sell that off so that you're not really cash poor, and therefore you're not entitled to like a Shechacha and Peah. So the Gemara Rav Papa gives another example. Rav Papa says that Allah Chalamai is the same idea. A person shows up in front of Beis and says, I want to collect like a Shechacha and Peah. We look at his cash account. If he doesn't have 200 zuz, we'll let him collect. Even if he has other possessions, we don't make him sell it off. However, if it turns out that he illegally collected like a shichan peah, Beis Din now wants to collect that again from his possession. Let's say he doesn't have money to pay it back. In that case, we'll tell him to sell off his possessions in order to go ahead and pay back the debt to the community. Good. Mishnah. What's the interesting case? You have an orphan girl whose mother or brother married her off with her consent. So now what happens? So mother or brother marry off the daughter with her consent. They wrote her, we're going back now to the cases of the dunya, they wrote her a relatively small, a modest dowry. So we'll say, what's ta'alocha? So the Gemara says, now, I'll point out over here, not only is she getting married willingly, but she accepts the dowry that they gave her willingly. So what happens? So the Gemara says, when she gets older, she can go back to the estate and extract the dowry that was really fit for her. Now also we're going to see that a father customarily gives 1/10 of his estate for his daughter's dowry. So now they married her off, and they gave her a small dowry. So when she gets older, she can go back to the estate and she could say, I want to take what's rightfully mine, i.e. 1/10 of my deceased father's estate. Rabbi Yehuda says, something again, Rabbi Yehuda says, if a father married off his oldest daughter, right? So let's say again, Reuven has 2 daughters, Rachel and Leah. He married off Rachel. He gave her 1/10 of the estate. Now he marries off Leah, but now he passes away. Now they're marrying off Leah. So what dowry do we give Leah? Rabbi Yehuda says we look at what he gave Rachel. Whatever he gave Rachel is what we give Leah. The Chum say that that's not a good model. Why? Pamim sha'adam ani v'ha ashir o ashir v'ha ani. Chum say you can't do that because sometimes a person's financial state changes in between the marriages of his children. In other words, maybe he was wealthy when he married off his first daughter, and now he's poor. Or maybe he was poor when he married off his first daughter, and he's wealthy now. Ella shamanes hanachasav v'nosar. The Chum say essentially we do a valuation of the estate. And we decide the dowry that way. Good. So we'll say let's analyze. So Amar Shmuel, Gemara says as follows. Shmuel says leparnasa shaman bav. So we'll say this is fascinating. Parnasa over here refers to nedunya, refers to dowry. So we'll say comes along Shmuel and Shmuel says like this. If let's say we'll say so this is a case where the father has died, right? His father has died. Daughter, right? Reuven died. His daughter Rachel is getting married. We want to give her a dowry from the estate. How much do you give her? So Shmuel says something very simple. Take a look at Rashi. The parnasa shamin ba'av habas yisoma shebasa linase nosna ladunya kafi omei shana bikim ba'avia bachana comes in. So Shmuel says something amazing. Essentially, we look at the giving patterns of the father. Was the father a generous guy or a miser? And again, we essentially allocate a portion of the estate for the dowry in accordance with the giving the giving patterns of the father. So Shmuel the Parnas Hashem Ba'ab Meisve, is that true? Habanos Nizonos Parnasos Minichsei Avihen. Daughters are Nizonos, fed, and Misparnasos, ultimately again supported from the estate of their father. Ketzad. Ein omrim ilu avia kayim kach v'kach hayanosin la. We don't say if the father was alive, we would have given her so and so. Ella shaman esanachasim la. Rather, what do? We evaluate the estate and we give her a portion. My love, parnasa sabarabos. It doesn't parnasa in this case mean on a dunya. And you see from here that we don't look at the giving patterns of the father. Rather, we just allocate a portion of the estate for the dowry of the daughter. Aram Nachman Yitzchak, no, parnasa sasma. No, parnasa means her actual day-to-day support. Nizonos umisparnosos katani, but it says nizonos and nisparnosos. Nizonos Rabosai means what? Nizonos means her day-to-day support. Misparnosos, I think, means her nedunya, her dowry. So the Gemara says, "My love achas parnosas, baba achas parnosas atzma." Lo, idi v'idi beparnosas atzma. Both are referring to her daily support. V'lo kasha haba achilo b'shtia. One is referring ultimately again to her eating and drinking, and one is referring to her clothing. Two separate allocations. So Tzarbo says, so therefore, again, I just want to point out what we're going to run up against over here. We're trying to figure out a statement to Shmuel. So Shmuel is saying something amazing. Shmuel says, Ruvain died, his daughter Rachel is now going to get married. The estate has an obligation to provide Rachel with a dowry. What's the question? How do we know how much? So what does Shmuel say? Look at the giving patterns of the father. If the father is a generous guy, give her a generous dowry. The father is a miser, give her a smaller dowry. So here we go. Second wide line. Tonight the Chum say, Pamish Adam ani ve'ashir o asher ve'ani el shaman hanachasiv v'nosnima. So we'll say, now this is the Mishnah. The Chachamim said sometimes, remember again, about the first opinion, the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said that Reuven married off his daughter Rachel, and now he died, and now Leah is getting married. So what do we do? The Chum say, look at what he gave Rachel, and give the same thing to Leah. The Chum came along and said, you can't do that, because sometimes people's financial situations change in between the marriage of children. So the Gemara says, but my ani umay ashir. What does it mean, ani and ashir? Inema ani b'nechasim, ashir b'nechasim. If it literally means ani, he's poor. Possession-wise poor, rich, possession. So Michal Tanakama Sava Afilu Asher ve'ani kidmei kari avinala. So what the Tanakama says, that we give the second daughter a dowry independent of Reuven's current financial situation, that doesn't make sense. So the Gemara says, Halesle elalav ani bidas, asher bidas. Rather, I will say what it must mean is like this. Ani must mean someone who is ani bidas. I'll say, what does it mean ani bidas? Ani bidas means I'm an ani in my mindset. In other words, in the way that I give, I'm miserly. Or in the way that I give, I'm wealthy. The Gemara said, the katani shaman es hanechasim v'nosnula. And yet we say, despite that, the Chachamim say, we don't look at his giving patterns. Rather, what do we look at? The estate. Alma lo azlinan basar umdina v'tiyofte d'shmuel. Rather, we'll say, what do you see? We do not go after the umdina. We'll say, in this context, umdina means we assess the giving patterns of the father. So you see from here that we do not assess the giving patterns of the father. Rather, we look at how much money the estate has. Tiyuf to the Shmuel, Rabbi say this effectively refutes the position of Shmuel. So Rabbi say we're not fully refuted, as we're going to see in just a moment. But Lamaisa, what we have are these two different models for assessing the value of the dowry. The Shmuel model, where we go ahead and we look at the giving patterns of the father himself. And the Chachamim model is we look at how much money the estate itself has. Let's go weiter. To which the Gemara says, Hu damar Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel himself holds like Rabbi Yehuda. This now, here we go. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Im hesi basa rishona, yinasim l'shniya kidar shnasa rishona. What does Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda says, when we're trying to figure out how much of a dowry the estate should give daughter number 2, let's look at how much money father gave daughter number 1. Let's just assess his giving patterns. To which the Gemara says, why don't you just make this whole thing easier and just say, B'nei Malach Rabbi Yehuda. Just say the Allah was Rabbi Yehuda. Yamar Malach Rabbi Yehuda, Hava Mina, Dafka Hisia, Tegali Daite. If the Gemara would have said Allah Rabbi Yehuda, I would have said that only works when? In a case where the father has actually married off a daughter. Because in that case, he's revealed his actual giving pattern. Avalo Yisialo. But in a case where he didn't marry off a daughter, perhaps we would not go ahead and assess his giving patterns. Kamash Molan, time of Rabbi Huda Dazlina Basar Umdina, Loshna Hisia, Veloshna Lohisia. Therefore, Rabbi say what you see from here is that really it actually makes, if you go Basar Umdina, if you go after giving patterns, it doesn't make a difference whether the father ever married off a daughter or not. Because Rabbi say it's obviously it's helpful if the father married off a daughter, because then we can see what he actually gave as a dowry. But even if he didn't marry off a daughter, what we do is Umdina means look at the way he spends his money or he gives away his money. Is he a generous guy or a miserly guy? The only reason it brought up the case of where he married off a daughter was to teach you the position of the Chachamim. The Chachamim say, even though Reuven married off a daughter, and we see that he gave a generous or a miserly dowry, we do not look at that in assessing the dowry to give daughter number 2 from the estate now that Reuven has died. We do not use past historical giving patterns as a way of assessing the value of a dowry from the estate. Rather, what do? We look at how much money the estate has. So I'll say fundamental machlokes. So Rabbi said to Rabbi Chisda, they say over in your name that the halacha follows Rabbi Huda. Rabbi say again, remember, Rabbi Huda and Shmuel say the same thing. We go basar umdina. When trying to figure out how much the estate should give the daughter for a dowry, we look at the past giving trends of the father. So there's Rava said to Rabbi Chisda, they say in your name that the halacha follows Rabbi Huda. Amrlei. So Rava said, Yehi Rava, Kol Kiani Mili Ma'al Yosa Tidrushu Mishmeh. Halavai, Halavai. They should always say over such beautiful things in my name. Beautiful. Umi Omer Rava, did Rava really say Vatanya? Rabbi Omer Basan, he's honest mina achin. No, tell us, Isser Nechasim, if a daughter is being supported by the brothers, which Rabbi say means that father died, daughter gets mzonos from the estate, brothers inherit the estate, the daughter is entitled to 1/10 of the estate for a dowry. So Rava said, what does that tell you? That's 1/10 of the estate, independent of what? Independent of what? The father's giving patterns. You see from here, we don't look at what the father gave, what the father didn't give. She's entitled to 1/10 of the estate. To which the Gemara says, Lokasha, had da amdine, had da lo amdine. It's very simple. I will say that could be referring to a case where we don't know the giving patterns of the father. In other words, I will say, the idea of going basar umdina only works when you know the father, the deceased father, and you know how he gave. But I will say, you could have many situations where we don't know the father, we don't know the guy, and therefore we have no idea about his historical giving trends. So in the default, Rabbi say, is that the daughter gets 1/10 of the estate for her dowry. There was a story one time Rabbi gave a girl 1/12 of the estate for her nedunya, kashna dadi. So is it 1/10 or 1/12? I will say again, it's not a contradiction. Rabbi will agree that when we know the father, we go ahead and we allocate the nedunya based on his historical giving trends. Like Rabbi Huda, like Shmuel, Basar Umdina. If you don't know the giving patterns of the father, then what do? The default is 1/10 of the estate. Gufa, Omer Rabbi Basan, Zonas Mina Achin, no tell us each Nechasim. If you have a daughter, Sarabah says the father died, sons inherited the estate, daughter is supported by the estate and gets 1/10 of the estate for her dowry. Amrul Rabbi, Lidvarech, listen to this. According to your logic, Mish Yeshlo Eser Banos Ubain, we'll say if Ruvain has 10 daughters and 1 son, and now he died, so what's going to be the halacha? Elo lebein b'makom baros klum. Then I will say if there are 10 daughters, each daughter gets 1/10 of the estate, and that means there's nothing left for the son. Amrlam, no. Kachane, what's what I mean to say? Rishona notela es iser nechasim, shnir b'masha shayra, shlishis b'masha shayra, v'chozeres v'cholkos b'shava. No. What happens? I will say they don't each get 1/10 of the estate. Rather, what happens over here? Daughter number 1 takes 1/10. Daughter number 2 takes 1/10 of what's left. Daughter number 3 takes 1/10 of what's left. And they take successive tenths. Then what do? Something very interesting. He suggests then what happens? Then they pool their tenths and then they divide that up equally 10 ways. So the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, I don't understand. Why are they pooling their interests and then dividing it back up equally? Everyone took what they were entitled to. Hakam is what it means to say. This is fascinating. In Bo Kulam Lihinase Ka'achas Cholkos B'Shava. That says a great case. So if Reuven dies, and Reuven leaves 10 daughters and 1 son. So Rabbi says, so what happens? The son inherits the estate. What do the daughters do? What do the daughters do for their nedunya? Each one takes a tenth. But again, Rabbi say, they don't take a tenth simultaneously. Rather, again, daughter number 1 takes a tenth, and then they each take a tenth from what is left over in the estate. What happens if halacha l'maisa again? If halacha l'maisa, they're all getting married at the same time, Baruch Hashem. So I'll say, so in that case, they'll still take each one a successive tenth. In that case, because they're all getting married at the same time, then they'll pool their interest and then divide by 10, so each one gets an equal portion. But I will say that's in a unique case where all 10 daughters are mamish getting married at the same exact time. But if that's not the case, each daughter takes a tenth of whatever is left over from the estate. So the Gemara says, Hachi Kamar, if good. So the Gemara says, Meseile Rav Masna, the Rav Masna, in Boli Nasei, Kulam Notlos Isser Echad. Right? If they come to get married, all of them take a tenth. So the Gemara says, Isser Echad, they take 1/10. Ella Notlos Isser Ke'echad. Rather, what it means is they all take their tenth like one. In other words, it means they all take a tenth. And again, the way it works, halacha l'mai says each of them take a successive tenth. But again, if they're all getting married at the same time, there is this unique halacha that they pool their interest and divide it equally 10 different ways. Beautiful. Tan Rabbanon. Habanos bein bagru achlo nisu. So we'll say, girls, if a girl becomes a bogeres but hasn't yet gotten married, ubein nisu achlo bagru, or they got married before bagrus, ibdu mizonos sehen, they've lost their mizonos, below ibdu parnasasan, but they have not lost their ability to collect a dowry from the estate. Divrei Rabbi. Shabbos say, so just listen to what's happening over here. So Rabbi says that halacha l'maisa, a girl is only entitled to mizonos until when? Only entitled to mizonos either until marriage or bagros. Marriage or bagros. However, again, according to Rabbi, a girl never loses her ability to go ahead and collect her dowry. Reb Shimon Elazar says, Af ibdu parnasasan. No. Once a girl either reaches bagros or ultimately gets married, in other words, what does it mean gets married? Gets married and accepts a lower amount for her nedunya, for her dowry, ultimately ibdu parnasasan. She's lost any further claim to enhance dowry as well. So we'll say, it's a fundamental machlokes. So keitzad heinosos. So we'll say, so what should a girl do? Sochras lahen bailim, umotzilen parnasasan. So we'll say what it literally means is, what should a girl do? She should hire a husband in order to get her dowry. In other words, we'll say, sometimes you have to create a financial incentive for marriage. So in other words, so lemaisa, again, the girl could say to a potential suitor, listen, marry me now, because I will receive a larger dowry if you do. Okay, so we'll say, this is a fundamental machlokes, Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Aram Nachman, Amar Lihuna, Hilchasa Rabbi, the halacha follows Rabbi. So we'll say again, what does Rabbi say? Rabbi says that a girl loses mizonos, either at the age of bagrus or at marriage. When does she lose her ability to collect a nedunya from the estate? The answer is, she doesn't. She always has it. So I will say, so if she becomes a bogeres, or for that matter, again, we saw this actually in the Mishnah, even if she gets married, and let's say she was only given a smaller nedunya, she has the ability to go back to the estate and reclaim that which is rightfully hers. So the Gemara says, Rav Nachman, so Rav Nachman, Yisoma she'esiya ima oacha midaita, but says our Mishnah, right? So you have a Yisoma whose mother or her brother married her off, midaita. But midaita means she consented to the marriage, and what? She consented to the nedunya amount. The cost of labor me'o b'chamishim zuz, and if I say all she got ultimately again was a lower amount of a ksuva. So the Gemara says, ultimately again, she can go back and take from the estate that which she is truly entitled to. Taima diktana. Now here's what's interesting. The reason this works, why, is because she got married as a ketana. Hagidola vitra lo. But so what do you see from here? It sounds like that Allah Chalamayis, if she was a gedola, in other words, either a nara or a bogeres, and got married and accepted this lower amount for her nedunya, then what? She would not be permitted to reclaim it. To which the Gemara says, no, lo kasha, hadamachoi, hadalomachoi. I will say one is the case ultimately again where she objected, and one was the case where she didn't object. Look at Rashi. Hadamachoi, Rashi says, Hada amar Rebbe lo ibdu, va'amar Rav Huna hilchasa kavase, B'shemicha amose isu nechase. So we'll say even Rebbe holds that in order for her to go back and collect Nudunya from the estate, she has to object. Or she has to say, fine, I'm getting married with this Nudunya, but this is not what I'm really entitled to. I'm really entitled to more. As long as she lodges a formal complaint, halacha l'maisa, she has the ability to go back and collect it later on. But if she never lodges a formal complaint, then what? Then she's been mevateres, she's yielded, and doesn't have the right to go back. Hachanai mistabra. So we'll have to stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Meretz Hashem with this Hachanami tomorrow. I will say shkoyach. No slichus, but there is shofar. Amen. Thank you, sir. Thank you.